So, in this episode of Mysterious Forces Beyond, from UFOs to monsters, the legacy of Charles Fort.
A procession of the damned.
I shall be accused of assembling lies, yarns, hoaxes, and superstitions.
As Fortians were often called the gorillas of science.
I had always had some doubts in my mind whether Charles Fort really could back up all of his statements.
He wrote of unidentified flying objects long before they became a staple of contemporary culture. And he coined the word teleportation. His name was Charles Fort. He was an American philosopher and writer, and he spent his life recording and cataloging bizarre and unusual events which science could not explain. Was this self-styled philosopher of science a visionary or an eccentric?
Ghostly visitation seemingly captured on film. Could this be a spirit descending a stair? Freaks of nature. Is this the celebrated Bigfoot monster? Mysterious burning deaths, a case of spontaneous human combustion? Such were the provocative anomalies in Charles Fort's universe. Fort's legacy is a colorful and voluminous record of these and other scientific anomalies. Now known as Fortean phenomena, these damned facts, as Fort called them, are still fascinating and largely unexplained. Nobody knows the life and work of Charles Fort better than Mr. X. He notes that Fort rebelled against his parents, dropped out of high school, and became a newspaper reporter.
As a reporter, he learned about newspaper writing through an inheritance from his grandfather, a prosperous businessman. He was able to travel the world by train, by ship, by steamer. He traveled to England, to South Africa. Fort would travel perhaps on 5 cents a day, buying bread, buying cheese, traveling 30,000 miles in perhaps 1 or 2 years, expanding his horizons.
Fort, a New Yorker, moved to London in 1920, following publication of The Book of the Damned, a radical critique of science and the catalog of scientific anomalies for which he is best remembered.
According to Fort himself, he'd actually been through the scientific literature, all the magazines and the classic textbooks in the New York Public Library several times. And this is probably tens of thousands of documents, a prodigious feat of scholarship. I think he wanted a change. He must have come to London because really that was the only place where there was a better library than the Library of Congress and the New York Public Library.
Over the next decade, London served as headquarters for the expatriate Americans' offbeat study of the bizarre. To learn more about Charles Fort and his controversial Book of the Damned, Mysterious Forces Beyond traveled to London.
The Book of the Damned.
Stage actor and Fort fan Ken Campbell reads from the Book of the Damned.
A procession of the damned. By the damned, I mean the excluded. We shall have a procession of data that science has excluded. Battalions of the accursed, captained by pallid data that I have exhumed, will march. You'll read them, or they'll march. Some of them livid, and some of them fiery, and some of them rotten.
With these words, Charles Fort launched his personal critique of science. Fort's book was an encyclopedic collection of the odd and strange. It featured reports of scientific anomalies which Fort believed had been unjustly swept under the carpet, victims of dogma.
He set the scientific world on its ears, as it were, by publishing 4 books full of these strange phenomena. And in them, he says that it's not his job, it wasn't his intention to embarrass science, but to make people think about scientific things, the way scientists themselves explain things. And I think he would probably say that his greatest accomplishment was in making people think.
There's something William James wrote way back at the turn of the century. He defined what he called the unclassified residuum. And the unclassified residuum is this collection of things that don't fit into scientific theories.
William Corliss continues the work of Charles Fort and has investigated and compiled anomalous phenomena for 25 years.
Scientists who will pay attention to the unclassified things, the things that don't fit will renovate science. And this is where the true future of science is.
Robert Ricard is the editor of Fortean Times, a magazine dedicated to continuing the study of Fortean phenomena.
The chief reaction to Fort, if you like, the chief antagonism, was to nickname him the arch enemy of science.
But Fort had influential admirers, including Alexander Woolcott, playwright Ben Hecht, and novelist Theodore Dreiser, who orchestrated publication of Fort's books.
They immediately recognized in Fort some kind of new superstar, a champion, if you like, somebody who was willing to take on scientists or the PR for science on its own level.
Mysterious forces beyond joined Ken Campbell as he retraced Charles Fort's daily walk to London's famed British Museum, where Fort pursued his study of bizarre and paranormal phenomena.
What he did was he went and read. That's basically what he did. He read and collected, and he collected all the things which were anomalous. One reads in the newspapers of hailstones the size of hen's eggs. One smiles. Nevertheless, I will engage to list 100 instances from the Monthly Weather Review of hailstones the size of hen's eggs. There is an account in Nature, November the 1st, 1894, of hailstones that weighed almost 2 pounds each. See Chambers' Encyclopedia for 3-pounders.
He must have been one of the few people of his era who actually read almost every book on almost all the sciences, as well as many other disciplines. So he gathered his material, and he, in the end, had something like between 40 and 60,000 little notes, which went up to comprise his 4 books.
1912, a flying machine over the Thames River. In South Africa, a footprint 4 feet long in granite. 1911, a fall of explosive hail, Columbia, Missouri.
He loved nothing better than to pore over back issues of the New York Times and other newspapers, looking for things that he said science can't explain. And he loved to hold up, here is this case of fish raining from the sky. Well, we all know fish don't rain in the sky, yet here's a case. It actually happened. It was reported here. Let's see those know-it-all scientists explain this.
He wrote things in a way to embarrass science. I consider him to be anti-science.
Fort didn't view himself as a scientist, but as a metaphysician, as a philosopher, as an iconoclast. He wasn't interested in where he stood with the scientists.
Fort had a great sense of humor, and I don't think he was fundamentally anti-scientific in many ways. I think, he just enjoyed all of these damned facts, as he called them.
Today, Charles Fort's mission is carried on by the Fortean Times, whose readers share Fort's curiosity about the paranormal.
The Fortean Times is something that you're never quite sure what's going to be in the next issue. It's the sense of the unexpected.
It's like partly funny, partly serious, partly bizarre.
I think it's an excellent source of bizarre information. It also has a saving grace of being very funny about its subject. It doesn't take anything too seriously.
He was trying to do a critique of science without, if you like, playing the same game as the scientists. He was interested in the aesthetics of what they were doing, which was a very odd sort of view. He was saying, in effect, that perhaps the scientific view of reality or of the world isn't necessarily the only valid view.
Anomalous phenomena are important to science because this is where true progress occurs. Science is really the exploration of the unknown, and anomalies are what is unknown about the world. So if you tackle your anomalies, you're going to advance science.
Close to 1,000 people from around the world converged on the University of London for the largest ever Fortean gathering. Leading researchers and investigators of Fortean phenomena offered demonstrations and lectures on the unexplained.
Skeptics and believers alike assembled in London in June 1994 for the Unconvention, a Fortean weekend of paranormal investigation.
Fort really wasn't interested in societies, or even a Fortean society. As part of the promotion of the book Below, his friends had to trick him into going to a dinner in New York City where they announced the formation of the Fortean Society to perpetuate Fort's work.
Whether Fort would have joined the party or not, his spirit pervades the Unconvention, sponsored by the Fortean Times. Not surprisingly, books and magazines were in heavy demand from paranormal enthusiasts who share Charles Fort's devotion to the anomalous and the bizarre.
The magic of Fort is the connecting process. Is looking at one thing and saying, well, what is the connection between that and that? Because there is one. The question is, can you find it, or can you think of one?
In this exhibition, I've worked with two researchers, and so basically I brought their material together to put together an exhibition exploring the 20 years of the history of Kaplan mutilation. It covers the topics of the perpetrators being maybe satanic cults, maybe some kind of government intervention, or even UFOs.
When using the tool, you find frequencies that are called window frequencies that give a good mandala effect. Once you've tuned to the mandala frequency, you allow a natural progression in the skill of accessing visual imagery to occur.
And in a way, Bigfoot has much more to do with Gothic too. You know, the image, a bit like Frankenstein monster.
And we found that a crocolith, this one here in Chiltern, needed to be combined with the ground plan of a wonderful abbey called Glastonbury Abbey. And we found that the correspondences of Glastonbury Abbey and the glyph were precise. And we realised that this formed a part of this key drive.
I was just documenting crop circles that day and noticed nothing unusual when I took the photograph. When the photograph came back from the developers, the strange object, which you can see on it, above the crop formation, appeared on the negative in the print. And I'm as baffled by it as anyone else is.
Fortean subjects frowned on by mainstream science are favorites of Ricard's magazine.
These are some of the things in the next issue. This is a crop circle at a place called West Kennet, and it was photographed on 10th of June 94. And here's a chap who has a double set of teeth at the front here. We're having articles on Loch Ness Monster. Here's a famous shot of Loch Ness Monster. It's quite controversial, taken by Doc Shields in 1986. Here's one of the earliest of the Loch Ness Monster photographs. It was taken in 1933 by Hugh Gray, right at the very beginning of the Loch Ness Monster phenomenon. And new evidence has come in to raise doubts about it. This is a very famous photograph showing Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes and Professor Challenger stories. He was actually very interested in spirit photography, and here you see he's had a portrait of himself taken with what they call the spirit extra. He had one of the largest collections of spirit photographs in Victorian London. And here we have a reprint, a commemorative reprint of the early announcements in the Victorian media of Jack the Ripper crimes. Cats with wings, and this shows a cat that turned up in a builder's yard just before the turn of the century, and it shows the two people holding the wing flaps of the cat. The really exciting thing about my work is that every so often I come across a real nugget, a story that appeals to my own areas of interest. So I was very gratified to see in a small North of England newspaper an appeal for help from a woman called Sylvia Moday about an experience that she'd had and wanted help understanding.
Mrs. Moday claims she witnessed a rain of frogs.
And we had a sudden storm, a freak storm, and I said, we better go and shelter under the trees. So we went under the trees, and the rain came pouring down. I said, it's hailing, and my son said, oh, it's not, they're frogs. Frogs. And they were all falling down. I thought they were coming from the trees, but I looked farther than the trees, and they were coming from the sky like snowflakes. And they were on our shoulders, on our hair, everything. It literally rained frogs. It did.
We shall pick up an existence by its frogs. Wise men have tried other ways. They have tried to understand our state of being by grasping at its stars, at its arts, or its economics. But if there is an underlying oneness of all things, it does not matter where we begin, whether with stars or laws of supply or demand, or frogs or Napoleon Bonaparte. One measures a circle beginning anywhere.
Fort was the first to call our attention to falling frogs and fish and so on. We now, I think, generally in the scientific community, agree that that happens. Well, now this makes it very interesting to go back, as has William Corliss and some others, to really try to get a box score, to get an idea of what falls more often and what falls less often, and how big do the fish get, and things of that kind.
If fish and frogs and other animals falling out of the sky might interest Fort to a peculiar degree, it's because Fort looked at the explanation. Anyone could say a whirlwind simply gathered up the frogs, a waterspout drew up the fish, emptied a pond, and then dropped it someplace else. Fort asked the question a little bit more seriously. In the middle of the desert, where do you find a pond full of frogs? Why do they fall in one place, one location? The explanation wasn't there.
Fires that have no apparent cause. Bodies so completely consumed by flames that only the feet and a blackened skull remain. The enigma of spontaneous human combustion, the Fortean phenomenon of the 90s, was the main event of the unconvention.
You ought not to start with the word spontaneous human combustion when you do this, and that you should not lump together cases that are clearly...
The legacy of Charles Fort is essentially one of what I would call benign skepticism. His philosophy of don't believe, just accept things tentatively until better evidence comes along, I think will serve anyone. It certainly served me very well. And I deal with complicated problems, full of questions of belief. Do you believe this or that? You're also dealing with witnesses who believe certain things happen to them, people who try and explain it according to their own beliefs. And what Fort has taught me, anyway, is that you must stand back from this. You must not get into the trap of believing something on inadequate evidence. And I think that probably that's his best lesson.
A former police officer, John Hamer, gave his eyewitness account of a case of spontaneous human combustion.
On January the 6th, 1980, I went to a house in Evervale where I attended, which what I think was a case of spontaneous human combustion. All that remained of Henry Thomas was a pile of ash, at one end a burnt skull, and at the other end 2 unburnt feet.
But Joe Nickel is not convinced by Hamer's evidence and arguments supporting his case for spontaneous human combustion.
When you have a case of an oil lamp in proximity to someone who supposedly spontaneously combusted, I mean, it seems to me perverse in the extreme that you call that spontaneous. The human body, which is largely water, does not have the capability of doing this. And so it is, from a scientific point of view, impossible. We found time after time after time probable sources for the ignition, and so we wonder why we continued with this word spontaneous. We found time and again extra fuel sources to aid in the immolation of the body, time and again. I just feel a little ticked off when we have bodies lying on hearths being attributed to spontaneous human combustion. I find it an insult to one's intelligence.
Hamer offers further documentation detailing the noted Tramp Bailey case.
This is the Tramp Bailey in Vauxhall 1968. Was found on the second floor of a derelict house with no gas, no electricity. He was a non-smoker. He had no matches nor lighter in his possession. There was no possible source of ignition to be found, except his intestines are hanging out of the cavity of his body there. The fireman found a blue flame issuing at force from that cavity, and that is what was burning the lower area of the stairs and the landing. There was a time when I believed anything scientific, that was it. Whatever a scientist said was true. But I now realise they are as fallible as everyone else, and sometimes they're even more fallible.
My type of skepticism says, prove it. And if you have the proof, you have the burden of proof, then maybe it's so. The problem with spontaneous combustion is when you ask them, prove your claims, they don't have sufficient proof.
It's this kind of spirited give and take that sustains Fortean Times editor Robert Ricard.
We carry on investigating, and we try and find some balance between the skeptics at one end, the people, the true believers at the other, both in their way committed to their points of view, and not strictly speaking Fortean. The Fortean position is right in the middle, probably the best place to watch the match. We're often accused of sitting on the fence, but in a way, sometimes the top of the fence is a mile wide and the safest place to be.
All great scientific advances come from things that don't make sense. I can mention quantum mechanics and physics. An atom jumps from one energy state to another. Nobody knows why.
Science of today the superstition of tomorrow. Science of tomorrow, the superstition of today. In the topography of intellection, I should say what we call knowledge is ignorance surrounded by laughter. Fort may have been described in his obituary as the foe of science, the enfant terrible of science. But Fort perhaps respected science a little bit more than people realize. Fort was against the scientist who held to dogma rather than investigation.
I can't quite define my motive, because to this day it has not been decided whether I'm a humorist or a scientist.
Eccentric or visionary, Charles Fort's mission was to open people's minds. He urged people to challenge accepted wisdom and to investigate and explore phenomena for which there may not yet be any scientific explanation. Next time, journey with us to the borders of the known and the unknown on Mysterious Forces Beyond.